Okay, everyone, so we are doing the reflections for the core facts and alternate explanations ideas. So just to remind you, we'll have today and then Wednesday, and after Wednesday, you are finally free from all of this. And Aaron will be starting class on the Thessalonians. So, too, I want you to be thinking about if you have any questions or there's still something that maybe doesn't make sense in what we've talked about throughout the whole class, because today and Wednesday would be the times to bring those up so that we can clarify or maybe shed some light or explain things a little bit more. Before we get into questions that we left off with, I want to ask a question of everyone. So as we've gone through the explanations and the different ideas that have been proposed throughout history about the resurrection and alternate explanations for it, what has maybe surprised you the most, or what have you found the most interesting when we've gone through all of these different ideas and comparing them to the conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead? What's maybe the most surprising or the most interesting to you? Andrew?
I would say that for every explanation, it seems like for each one, there's one key hurdle that's hard to cross. It's a different hurdle for different theories. But you always hit something where there's a jump in your reasoning that you have to make in order to accept it. And the same goes for Jesus was raised from the dead, by the way. That jump and hurdle is believing that God raised Jesus from the dead, that God is real, and that that's what happened. But it's true for all of them, that there's either a missing piece of information or something that doesn't match the information that is kind of the linchpin for every single one.
Right. So we go back to the beginning of the class and the intro material that we did. Did we say that this is, 100% knockdown proof of you can show without beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus has risen from the dead? Is that what we said we were doing? No. I mean, this is not math. And math is really the only place where you can do that to show if this is the case and that's the case, then this is the case. We're showing that Jesus' resurrection is the best explanation, right? We would take that because of our faith and take that further. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but just the way that we've been approaching it in this class is we're showing this is the best explanation. When we put all of the information together and we try to say, okay, what's the most reasonable conclusion, then we're saying it's Jesus' resurrection. So yeah, there are some different leaps that you have to get through, but we're showing that these alternate theories that have come up or the different ways that people have tried to explain, they just don't work because they have more in the way of things. So I think the best way to explain that kind of reasoning is, and I think we've talked about this before, when you go to your doctor and you say, hey doc, I've got this thing going on and this thing going on and this thing going on, does your doctor say, oh, absolutely without a shadow of a doubt, this is what's happening? No, not usually. I mean, they might be pretty confident about something. But they say, well, it could be a couple things. It could be this, could be this, could be this. But I think it's this one because this makes the most sense based on what you're telling me. And so that's a certain kind of reasoning. It's the same reasoning that we're doing for this. Reasoning to the best explanation. So again, that's not the same as the type of reasoning that says, if A, then B, then C. That's not what we're saying. You could say that it's the type of probability, maybe we're talking about that, but the way that we're approaching it is reasoning to the best explanation based on the information that we have. So I think that's important because for one thing, it keeps us humble because especially like when I was about to say a lot younger, but they can't really get a lot younger, I guess. But when I was a lot younger and I started encountering some of these things, I was like, man, I've got it figured out. And people who don't see it, they're just ignorant or they don't want to look at it. And that was my youthful hubris talking. But when you realize, yeah, this is the best explanation, it's not relying on my smarts, it's relying on what God's revealed. I think that's helpful. So however that related to what Andrew just said, that's what I was thinking. And we're going to turn it to Greg now, because he had his hand up too.
Well, I mean, you're talking about standards in human law, too, where there's a civil action and there's a criminal action. In a civil action, you have the preponderance of evidence being the standard. So that's what we're talking about. If you're talking about, the choice to put someone in prison for a long time or put them to death for their crimes, you have to be beyond reasonable doubt. And even the law admits there that we're not perfect because we're men. But if there was any shadow of a doubt, then we're not going to pursue forward.
Yeah.
We can have that shadow of a doubt. That is, again, as those who were the believers were like, I'm shocked that Jesus is risen from the dead because that's never happened. That's where the preponderance of evidence standard is more applicable. But what I was going to say is that what I have taken from our studies together has been that when we're faced with facts and we're faced with evidence and we're faced with unexplainable things, men's minds tend to do the same thing they did 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
They look for the best explanation, and if they reject the best explanation, they look for conspiracy, and they begin to conspire to reshape the evidence in order to fit the narrative they want to believe in, rather than the one that the facts or evidence points them to believe in. We do that today, and we did that a long time ago, and the human brain works the same way that it did then.
Yeah.
They're just as sophisticated in their thinking and logic as we are. We talk about the Enlightenment and all that. They were pretty enlightened in terms of the way that they're just like us.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to make sense of the world, and we prefer to do that in a way that's similar to the way that we are already thinking. It's exhausting to just constantly change your worldview all the time, right? And so human nature is, I'm going to try to find the best explanation within the way that I'm looking at things now. And we've always done that. And that's part of, we are not 100% rational creatures. We're just not. And that was one of the faults of the Enlightenment, is, thinking that we are just always completely rational in everything that we do is just not true. And so that's one of the things with this too, is this is all, good rational information, but this is just a part of the puzzle in talking with somebody, right? You have to have the operation of the Spirit on someone's heart and, all kinds of things that are happening, and this is just a piece of it. Anybody else that wants to say, yes, Margaret?
The facts that have been presented serve just to solidify what I already believe. But the most interesting part of this to me has been the emotions of the people involved.
Yeah.
Attitudes and things like that. Those are things that, while we were well aware of the facts, maybe we didn't consider all those attitudes and the emotions. It seems there were so many different things, and I just found it really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that you walk away from all of this having your convictions deepened, because that's really what this is, to just show how sure of a foundation our faith is on. And this is just one way of looking at it, but I hope, you walk away feeling a little bit more grounded and more sure of what it is that we believe. Absolutely. Anybody else dying? Addie? Oh, I know you. You always want to talk in public, yeah.
I think one of the biggest things to me that stood out was all of the incidentals that when you read the story, I overlooked.
Yeah.
I didn't really think about those. But looking at it from the lens of, talking to someone about it and just looking at, who was first at the table, who was a leader at the time, just things that we don't. I didn't live back then, so it's hard for me to think about
Right.
those things. But
Yeah, it shows that we're being given a reliable account of what happened. And it's just kind of falling together even when they're not trying to actively. Chet?
Seems to me amazing to me on your chart up here. Look how many is against the resurrection of Christ, and there's just one.
Right.
So that's was really brought up to me that I didn't know that there had been that many
Yeah.
against it.
This is just a piece of it. Right? I mean, there's been all kinds of crazy things that have been said. You know, one that I came across recently that I'm going to say it to you, and we're not even going to talk about it because it's just really kind of ridiculous. And that's my judgment is, you know, the disciples believed that they saw Jesus because they were all together and they got high on drugs and hallucinated. And that was really, Jesus was kind of like a hippie, you know, cult leader, and they were all taking drugs together, and that's why they saw. I mean, there's no end to the different explanations that have been had. That was a new one to me going through this time. And I had to put my phone down for a second and just think about, okay. Yeah. All right. So where we left off kind of in what we were talking about Wednesday is this idea at the bottom of page 7 with number 2 of, you know, what if somebody's objecting that all of what we're talking about is corrupted or biased? And so we were talking about this idea of arguing inerrancy, so arguing that everything that the Scripture says is true is probably not the best way to talk to somebody. And I'm sure that confused some people what exactly it was that we were saying. And actually, as we ended class, I was just sitting there and I was having things pop into my brain and I was writing them down of what I wanted to talk about. And so like we said, we're not saying that the absolute truth of Scripture is not important. I'm saying in using these things to talk to people, it's probably not the best course of action. And one of the reasons that I'm saying that is because I believe that's what the apostles did. Okay, so let's turn to Acts chapter 17 as an example. And this is just because I believe most of you probably know what's going on in Acts 17, right? The famous Paul in Athens. And we could go to other texts as well, but I just want to use this one as an example. And we're not even going to necessarily read through everything, but I want you to kind of skim through and look. So Paul is talking to the Greeks, right? They're not at all within that worldview of the Hebrew Scriptures, and maybe some of them don't even know that those exist. Does Paul start out his discussion with these people in saying, this is what God's prophets have said, and everything that they said is true, and so you need to believe it? Is that what Paul did here? No, he didn't. He didn't. What does he center his whole discussion on?
One of the first things he says is that I recognize you're very religious people or something like that.
Yeah, so he's building a bridge there, absolutely. Yeah, so he builds a bridge with them. He says, you're religious people, so I want to proclaim to you what it is that you're kind of thinking about and sympathetic to. But say starting in, the letters are looking very small today. Verses 29 through 31, what is the whole core of what he brings to them? In verse 30 and 31 specifically. Yeah, so I want to talk to you about this religious fervor that you have. And specifically, I want you to understand that what you are worshiping in ignorance, I'm proclaiming to you, and it was the fact that God raised this man from the dead. He doesn't mention anything about the Scriptures here, does he? So basically, I want us to see that the apostles, they didn't go forward and talking with people and arguing about the truth of the Bible first. Okay, right? What they did was they presented Jesus. And as we said in the introduction, the whole core of their preaching and what they talked about, and what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 about the core facts of the gospel is Jesus and him crucified, right? And resurrected. And so if you get confused as to why would he say, don't argue about whether the Bible's true. I'm not saying don't ever do that. But the way that you should approach things with people who don't share that perspective, I think is taking the example of what the apostles did and putting all of the pressure on Jesus as really the core of it. Because we can get distracted with everything else. But what the apostles did with people who didn't share that ground of Scripture is to say, you need to look at Jesus because that's where everything then branches off from. Is that making sense what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to think of different ways to say it. Right? Okay. We're just following the apostles' example with this, is really the point. And so part of this, like we just said, we're talking about the resurrection. We're doing it in this way because I want you to feel grounded in your faith. Because when you have you ever started talking with somebody, or you see maybe like a video on social media or some kind of documentary or something, and it's coming up with all of these different objections from all these angles about this is why the Bible can't be true, and Christianity is a conspiracy because of this, and there's just all these things from so many different angles. And you just start to get a little overwhelmed and kind of wonder, like, how am I supposed to answer all of this? Has anybody been there before? Right. So we get easily distracted, and we can start talking about all of these other things. And what I want you to see is, to a certain degree, if Jesus is raised from the dead, some of that stuff doesn't matter, and some of it will fall into place based on the fact that Jesus was raised from the dead. Right? So an example, just I thought about it, this is the core of our faith. And so the ideas of, is there any archaeological evidence for Noah's flood? That shouldn't shake your faith in Jesus, right? If you don't understand any archaeological evidence for the flood, that shouldn't make you think, well, then Jesus couldn't be raised from the dead. But that's the way that we approach things, right? If I can't be sure about this in the Bible, if I can't know that this thing happened, or that there's archaeological evidence for the conquest of Canaan or whatever it is, then we start to spiral. But with what we see with this, and how I want you to apply it with yourself, is Jesus was raised from the dead. So to a certain degree, I don't really need to know whether there's archaeological evidence for the flood. Because you know what? Jesus was raised from the dead, and to a certain extent, Jesus said, yeah, this happened. Okay, that's good enough for me. And it takes a little bit to get there. But I want us to remain grounded and secure in the core of our faith and not get distracted with secondary or tertiary problems. Because a lot of times, I see that's kind of people's downfall, is they start to see these questions that they don't have answers to, and it's a domino effect of, well, I can't answer this, or I don't understand this. And it takes them away, and it's really sad when that happens. Because did the early Christians know the answers to all of those apologetics questions? Did they understand, the dating of the Exodus, or, whether the Gospels correspond with ancient historiography and all those kind of... No, they didn't. And to a large degree, I don't think it was even on their minds. But they knew Jesus and him crucified, and the fact that he was raised from the dead and he appeared. And we need to keep that same focus, because in our modern world, we can get so distracted by so many different things. And so that's a big importance of what we're talking about with here. Is that helpful? What do you think about when you think about that? Have you found yourself maybe getting distracted by those other kinds of questions before? Is it beneficial to you to think about, all of this, it rests on Jesus and not all of this other stuff? What do you think about when we're saying all this? Andrew?
There is tell a lie than to disprove the lie once it's been told. It
Yeah.
spreads way faster, it takes way less effort. It's almost a throwaway action to spread something that's false or to spread doubt, but it takes a lot of work to prove and establish something as true. And so, yeah, if someone throws out 5 or 6 things they've heard, online or just picked up over the years about why they don't trust the Bible, it takes so much longer and so much more effort to break down and boil down each one that most people will lose interest in that process. And so it takes discernment on our part to choose. Okay, I'm going to say to a person, look, I'm choosing to focus on this, and it would help to start with this. We can get to that maybe at some point, but I don't want to muddy the waters too much.
Yeah.
And it's tough because then to do that in a way that doesn't feel like you're just dodging the question or being evasive, that it takes some tact.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just sort of an example of what Andrew's talking about. Okay, so you're talking with somebody and they present you with this question or this objection, and maybe you've never heard of this before. But Jesus is who he said he is, and he was raised from the dead. And so the best course of action with that, whatever objection they have, is, you know what, I don't really know what I think about that or what the answer is. I'll look into it and, we can talk about it. But you don't have to freak out, is really the difference. I don't know what the answer to that is, and that's okay. Because I know that Jesus was raised from the dead. And that doesn't mean that we evade it, and that doesn't mean you're not going to look into it or talk to it. But it shouldn't take away the foundation of what you believe. Okay? Yeah.
It's good to remember, too, that the person bringing these up, they probably haven't gone through the whole rigmarole of proving their stance either.
Yeah.
They're taking the shortcut route of repeating something they've heard, and it's important that we don't take the shortcut on the things that establish our faith and just repeat what we've heard. And if we have that core, I'm thinking, the image of like a deep river and then all the little tributaries flow into that river. You don't have to map out every single little tributary. You know where the solid truth, where the core of your belief lies, and you can trust in the things that you don't know. You can have faith in the areas that you don't know, that they will flow into the main thing that you do know. There was a discussion of faith that I heard recently broken down that I hadn't really heard before, where we take faith as the evidence of things not seen and go, oh, faith is evidence, faith is knowing, faith is certainty. And the description that I heard that I kind of liked was that faith is not knowing, faith is being comfortable with not knowing. And so faith is the acceptance of the things that I don't know, and the being at peace with, there's things I don't know and don't understand, but through faith, I don't have to be undone by those things.
Yeah. Because ultimately, it doesn't rest on my ability to answer all the questions. It rests on God. And even the example there of that, the definition of faith at the beginning of Hebrews 11, the context of what that's all in is that the patriarchs and all the fathers who came before us, they were looking for a city, right? They were looking to live with God. They hadn't seen it. They didn't have evidence of it really, but they trusted God because he said that this is what's coming. And that's kind of part of that discussion that's going on there is, I know whom I have believed, and I'm persuaded that he's able to keep all of those things. And too often, in our world, we can become lazy and not think about things, just take things for granted. And then on the opposite end, we can think that everything hinges on my ability to answer all of these objections. And I have to have an answer for everything that somebody says, and I have to be able to show them why it's either misguided or wrong, and that's just not true. And when we do that in talking with people, we're putting way too much weight on ourselves. But I see that more and more, and I've done that myself, to where I have to have all the answers, and I have to be able to tell everybody everything. And that is taking the true power out of the equation. It's not about how smart we are or how many answers we have. But a lot of these things can help to undergird our faith. I've got Greg and then Brace.
So only a couple weeks ago, there was another quote-unquote team of scientists, and every time I hear the word team of scientists, I have to go, are they wearing like jerseys, or
Yeah.
what makes them a team?
They have a secret handshake.
Yeah, secret handshake. The team of scientists have used some sort of electronic equipment, seismic measures,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
readings on this ripple in the earth on a mountain in Turkey
Mhm.
that has somewhat of a boat shape to it, and it's rather large formation in the ground. And they seem to have identified that they have found underground passages or caverns or rooms within this geological formation. It's a rock formation, but wood petrifies. But I thought if you're able to establish that that is in fact a human-made structure, and it is the remnants of a boat that have been deposited on the side of a mountain, I've got other explanations for that that don't involve Noah. Did he put a brass nameplate on the side and said this is Noah's Ark? How do we get from that he is the one who built that structure? How do we get from that there's also evidence of a worldwide geological event, which is a singular flood of the earth. But is there only one? Has it happened where there are enough pieces of information that people are able to piece together and call this a worldwide flood? God promised he would never flood the earth again. But are we able to just not have enough understanding to know whether or not that's the case? But ultimately, it's the eyewitness accounts, and it's the testimony of God himself, which makes me believe that that's a real event and not a mythological event. The fact that other cultures also have flood accounts has been used as evidence that, something big certainly happened or they wouldn't all be talking about it. And no, that's not necessarily true. There's other explanations for that too, that one story was a really good story and other cultures adopted it and said, we kind of like that, it's kind of cool, we're going to use that. So it still comes down to, do you have a mind that is open to believing in an all-knowing God and his plan for mankind? And has there been enough core information that gets you a foundation in that? Now, the fact that anything that's been found has not contradicted that core information is pretty significant. I mean, no one has scientifically proved the non-existence of God. No one has scientifically proved that a flood of the entire earth did never happen. No one has scientifically proved all this kind of stuff that is can be reassuring, I suppose. But I will question the science before I question my faith because of all the other questions that my faith answers that science cannot.
Yeah. Yeah, so the example that you talked about, I actually saw a video just a couple days ago about it. If that thing in the mountains of Turkey, is proved to not be Noah's Ark, does that matter? I mean, it would be cool if we could say, hey, this corresponds a lot with Noah's Ark. But if it is shown that it's not Noah's Ark, none of you should question your faith. But the way that we often approach things is, a team of scientists has decided that this fits exactly the measurements given using the Egyptian cubit versus, the Semitic cubit and all of that. This is Noah's Ark, and people say, see, here's the proof that the whole Bible is true. And then through subsequent studies, it's shown, no, there was an error in the methodology here, and it's actually not Noah's Ark. And then people are completely deflated and crushed, and they're questioning their faith. And that's sad, but it's just silly. If things like that are proved to be wrong or they just don't exist, that should not cause you to question Jesus, right? He's the foundation and the core of all those things. And we'll go to Brace.
Well, what you said earlier about the fact that we've got to have all the answers. Number one, as you said, it takes away from the real power behind any of this anyway. But the reality is, even if we had all the answers, even if it were possible for us to have all the answers, you're not going to convince everyone. The Son of God walked on the earth. piece of evidence they ever needed to believe in him as the Son of God and as the eternal life that he is. And the majority of people who saw him and heard him and witnessed him did not believe. So if he had that, if that was the impact or the result of his teaching and his life, how can we dare think that we're going to fare any better?
Absolutely. Yeah, the incarnate Son of God was here, and not everyone believed in him. And so for me to think, I've got all the answers, and so I can do it all, it's just arrogance in the highest. I've been there. I'm not putting that on anybody else. I've done that. And thought, either I have all the answers or I can get all the answers, and that'll just make everything fall into place. And it doesn't. Jesus is the center of our faith. That's what we're saying. Jesus is the center of our faith. And if we base it on other things, whether that's our own intellect or that's questions about some boat-like figure up in the mountains of Turkey, we're missing the buck. Look at what the apostles did and what they brought to people. It was all Jesus and him crucified and resurrected. That is what we need to focus on and follow their example, right, Alicia?
There's a sense of faith to everything, and I think that's something we miss by thinking that we can get the answers and prove through logic what happened, because even scientific atheism that doesn't believe in the creation and the Noah's Ark and the flood and those kinds of things, they have to believe in part of it too, because there was no eyewitness at creation. There's only historical evidence of a worldwide flood and things like that, and so they can explain away just as much as we can try to explain what happened, because there's a sense of faith in all of it, and you're never going to have enough evidence to prove to someone that doesn't want to believe it what happened. And we have to just focus on being the best we can be and living the life that we're expected to live.
You mean just trusting God? That's all we have to do? What? Yeah, that's really... None of us has perfect reasons for everything that we believe. No, nobody does, right? But that's part of a human mistake, is to think that we do. And there's a whole tangent that I'm really trying to keep myself from going down here. Oh, man. No. It's about the theory-ladenness of observation and things. That just nobody wants to hear about that right now. If you want to hear about it later, I will talk to you about it. But we have to rely on something somebody else has said somewhere down the line, right, Andrew?
I feel like it's good to remember too that this isn't a trait of dumb people versus smart people.
Yeah.
This isn't a trait of educated versus not educated, religious versus not religious, or anything like that. Because this is almost universally a human trait, is our own will to believe something or disbelieve something will almost always override the objective evidence whether we should believe it or disbelieve it.
Mm-hmm.
People believe something based on whether they feel like it makes sense to them. I saw a survey that was done of asking people all these different questions, factual questions, science questions, trivia questions, and then at the end asking them, how sure are you that you're right? And the respondents were blatantly admitting, I don't know, I guess it's this. They were just guessing all the answers. At most, they had maybe a 50-50 shot if it was a yes or no question. And then at the end, they would say, I think I'm 75%, 80% sure that I'm right, 90% it trended like 90% sure that they were right on just all-out guessing. And so people's confidence in just, once I feel like I'm right, that is so hard to override, even with what we would say is just so objectively true evidence. It's right there in front of you. Math can't persuade people that they're right if they believe they're right sometimes.
Absolutely not. I've seen different writings saying things similar to what Andrew was talking about, that people don't believe things based on the evidence usually. You can present a perfectly deductively valid case to someone and they're not going to believe it, but usually what makes someone believe something is somebody they trust told them. And that's most of the time the way that humans are. If I trust this person and they're telling me it's true, then I'm going to believe it, even if there's all this evidence to the contrary. And that's That's the way we all are, to some extent, right?
There was a team of scientists, ironically, that
Yeah.
wanted to study this in the political process. I ran across,
Might be where I saw it,
I
yeah.
ran across this study that said when, and I don't remember, it was Finland or it was Sweden or somewhere, when presented with facts contrary to their convictions, most politicians doubled down on their convictions and actually got more firm in their belief in what they wanted to believe after having presented facts to the contrary.
Yeah. That, team of scientists, you could also say studies have shown,
Studies have
and that's the same thing.
shown.
We should start asking which scientists and which studies, okay? Don't leave it at that. But that's a totally different class. But right, yeah. So to sum all that up, what we've been talking about for the last while is put your faith in Jesus, right? The entire narrative of the Bible has centered around him. God put all of this weight on him. And we need to put our faith in him, not answers that we can come up with for other questions, not do I understand everything perfectly, but the fact that Jesus is Lord and Christ. That's where we need to put our faith. So I want to look at question number 4 on page 8. So that's going to be that last reflection. So this is going to finish up the core facts and alternate explanations. I tried to shorten that title, but I couldn't think of anything. So if you can come up with something better, I'll change it in my notes. But so that'll kind of finish this as we talk about this. And then Wednesday, I want to take our time to think about just really big picture things about everything that we've talked about and sort of reflections and ways forward. So number 4 on page 8, does seeing that Jesus' resurrection is the best explanation for the information, does that help me? So we're not just saying this is cool information. The reason that we're talking about this is because I think it's beneficial to believers. So does looking at all of this and just seeing the reliability of Jesus' resurrection, does that help you? If you say yes or no, I'm going to ask why. So be prepared for that.
I say yes, because it gives us a basis of talking to those outside of Christ. First of all, we got to know where they're at. And what
Yes,
their belief
absolutely.
is. Then we approach it from that to this direction of the ascension of Jesus Christ from the grave and into heaven.
Yeah.
And he's our right hand up in heaven waiting to welcome us if we're faithful.
Yeah. Chet brings up something really important that I want to take a moment to mention. Is he said you got to figure out where somebody's at. And we looked at, Acts 17 and the apostles. Paul is building a bridge with the Greeks. You have to start where somebody is. You see that throughout all of the writings of the apostles, right? That is what they did. You have to figure out where they are, and then what you need to do is, okay, how does this go back to the cross? That's the way to talk to people. Okay, so I want to bring that up just because he talked about it. So build a bridge, and how do you turn that bridge back to the cross is kind of the way to go about it. So that's your little extra for the day. Somebody else, does this help you? Emily.
I think so because I grew up in the church and I grew up knowing Jesus raised from the dead. Matter of fact, no
Yeah.
question about it, Jesus
Duh.
raised from the dead. Duh. And so I think seeing the fact that, first off, like we've said, like the other answers as to where Jesus went, kind of help prove that he did go somewhere. They weren't saying, the body's still there, what are you talking about, you fools? Like they had to prove that the body went somewhere, and so it's helpful to see that, well, if everyone believes the body went somewhere, all of these reasons have flaws in them, and none of us want to believe something that doesn't have a most reason. Like, if you tell me the sky is blue because of this, or you tell me the sky is green because I don't want to believe that the sky is blue because that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, of course I'm going to believe the sky is blue because it has the most evidence.
Yeah.
And so instead of saying, no, duh, Jesus raised from the dead because that's what I've been told since I was a kid, seeing the evidence in it is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, apparently your dad didn't do a very good job of explaining all this, right? I'm just picking on him because he's not here. And he might be watching this right now just like, I'm going to get that guy. But he and I go back and forth like that a lot. But something else, based on what Emily's talking about, can you believe that Jesus was raised from the dead without going through all this information? Absolutely. Presumably, you all did, and that's why you were here, right? What we're doing is we're thinking about it and meditating on it and just strengthening our conviction in what God has already revealed. That's what we're doing. We're not proving this because you don't already believe it or you can't believe it unless you know this. But it should make us more confident in what God has done when we see this bigger picture and we see how reliable it is. That's really what it is. You should walk away from this class marveling at what God has done through his Son. Right? Anybody else? Does this help you, Brace?
I mean, what you just said is important because, I mean, one of the things that's helpful about this is it gives us things that shows us that what the world claims that faith is just blind trust in something we can't see is ludicrous. I mean, there is a substantial amount, heaps of evidence for us to believe what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is not just blindly trusting in something because we've heard it or because someone claimed it or whatever. I mean, that may be the reason why we believed it, but it doesn't have to be. There are mounds of evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. God is reliable and he's given us things to go off of. Anybody else? Andrew.
I'd say the way that it's helped me the most is the fact that it brings a picture of the human events and the human elements that surround the story. So all the way back to the start of the class when we were talking about sort of how this oral tradition in 1 Corinthians 15 was the statement of faith or the, if you call it creed, that was sort of early on established that would have been memorized and even recited to churches and to people who were believers. That just has helped me with making a picture of the choices that people made with this information and just the way they carried it forward in a way that to me clicks and is sensible. Like, yeah, this is the way people behave. This is human behavior when they want to preserve something like this or when something's important like this. It hasn't helped me because I think it's sparked an interest in, I want to learn more about a lot of really tangential stuff that isn't supporting really the core element of faith, but all these other details we've been talking about that are supported. But I'm like, well, what is all the other things that people are saying? And I don't know if that's
I got a book list for you if you want to go down. It's exhausting, I'll tell you that. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I hope that this has been helpful for you and you can see this larger picture of what God has done. And so Wednesday, we will just really look at things big picture and be thinking about if you have any questions or things that still don't make sense, or just really any other reflections. Be writing those down and let's share those together. Does anybody else have something that they need to say before we close? Okay, thank you, everyone.